Hi everyone! In this video, I'm going to show you how to use quadratic formula. So quadratic formula is a very useful method that we can use for solving quadratic equations because it will work for any type of quadratic equations. It can be used for factorable quadratic equations. It will work for non-factorable quadratic equations. Let's start with writing down the quadratic formula. Okay, so here's the formula. X is equal to negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. So this is quadratic formula, but I usually call it magic formula because it is so useful when you're solving quadratic equations. So I'm going to call it as magic formula. So what are these letters, A, B, and C? What are these letters stand for? So these letters are from the quadratic equations, the general quadratic equations. So ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So when you have the quadratic equations in this form, when you have the right side of the equation or left side of the equation, or one side of the equation is equal to 0, a, B, C will be plugged into the quadratic formula to solve for x. So let's try some examples. So here's the example. 6x squared plus 7x minus 7 is 0. So how do we solve this equation? You just need to know what A, B, and C from the equation. So A is positive 6, B is positive 7, C is negative 7. So let's try plugging in these numbers. So X is negative B, so positive 7 is the B, so that means it's negative 7 plus minus square root of b squared, so positive 7 squared minus 4, a is 6, so I'm going to write the brackets to represent the multiplication. So 6 and c as negative 7 and divide whole thing by 2a, so 2 times a, which is 6. Let's put these numbers into the calculator. So negative 7 plus minus square root of 49, 4 times 6 times negative 7 is going to be 168. So it will be 168 inside the bracket, square root, and divided by 12. So it will be 168 plus 49 is negative 7 plus minus square root of 217. So if you take that square root, it will be negative 7 plus minus 14.73092, rounded to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 decimal places, and divided by 12. So let's try writing the answer in two separate answers. So it will be negative 7 plus 14.73092 divided by 12. And the other one is negative 7 minus 14.73092. So it will be negative 7 plus 14.73092 divided by 12. That's negative 5.7724. And the other one is negative 7 minus 14.73092 divided by 12. that we have negative 1.81091. Okay, so these two numbers are approximate. So these is one way to write the answer. So x can be written as this form. The solution can be written as decimal values, or you can simply write the answer as this. You can leave the answer in radical form if you want. Okay, so this is actually an acceptable form of the answer, so I'll keep it in radical form because that's more accurate. So this is how you apply the quadratic formula to any quadratic equations. So before we end this video, I want to talk about how the quadratic formula was derived. So you don't have to memorize this. Once you understand how the quadratic formula was derived, you're okay to just use it without knowing this. Or yeah, so this is just for better understanding of the quadratic formula, why it is made and why you're using it. So let's start using ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. So using this general form of quadratic equation, we're going to make the formula, which is x is equal to negative b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Okay. The idea behind this formula is using completing the square method that we talked about in the previous video. So we're gonna follow the same method in the completing the square method. So using this completing the square method, CTS, we're going to factor out the a. So if you factor out the a from the first two terms to do the CTS, it will be x squared plus b over a. X, leave some space before you close the bracket, plus c is equal to 0. So remember, the coefficient of the x term will be divided by 2, and then you're going to square that value to make the expression inside the bracket to complete the square. Perfect square. So it will be b over 2a, and you're divided by 2, and then you're going to square that value, which is b squared over 4a squared, and that will go into that bracket. It will be plus b squared over 4a squared. So even though we use that value to make the expression perfect square, because of the a in front of the bracket, because of this, the actual value that we added to the left side of the equation is actually a times b squared over 4a squared. If you factor out the a or cancel out the a's, this b squared over 4a is the value that we added. So we would have to do the same thing on the right side of the equation. So we're going to add b squared over 4a. So let's simplify the equation. So inside the bracket will be factored as x plus b over 2a squared plus c is equal to b squared over 4a. Let's remove the c from each side. A times x plus b over 2a squared is b squared over 4a minus c. Let's simplify the right side of the equation in a one fraction. So that can be written as over 4a. So it will be b squared minus, this can be written as 4ac over 4a, using the common denominator. It will be 4ac. Divide both sides by a, which means multiply by 1 over a. These are gone. A is gone. X plus b over 2a squared is b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. Let's get rid of this square by taking the square root. We're going to put the plus minus sign in front of the radical. It will be x plus b over 2a is equal to plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. This radical with the fraction inside can be written as plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over square root of 4a squared. The denominator, radical in the denominator can be simplified as 2a. So it can be written as plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. We're almost done. Let's get rid of this b over 2a by subtracting from both sides. And now we have x is equal to negative b over 2a plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac over 2a. Since these two fractions have same denominator, we can combine those two as minus b plus minus square root of b squared minus 4ac as x, and that is our quadratic formula. So that's how we derived to the quadratic formula using completing the square method. So when do we use the quadratic formula? We can use this quadratic formula for solving any quadratic equations. We can also use this to determine how many solutions or what kind of solutions we're going to have before we actually solve the equation. So I'm going to end this video with short note. So note for the nature of the root, which means the discriminant. It's called the discriminant, the b squared minus 4ac in the quadratic formula. So this part will give us what kind of solutions we're going to have in the equation, even before we actually solve the equation. So b squared minus 4ac will tell us the nature of the roots. So b squared, when the b squared minus 4ac is positive, greater than 0, then you're going to have two distinct real roots. When b squared minus 4ac is equal to 0, you're going to have just one root, and we sometimes call that double root. When b squared minus 4ac is negative, less than 0, and there will be no real roots. And that makes sense because b squared minus 4ac is under the root sign, the radical sign. There's no way we can have any value when you have negative under the root sign. For example, square root of -2. That doesn't make sense. So that's not possible. So that's why we have no real roots when the discriminant is negative. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions that you want me to go over in the next video, please send us an email. I'll see you in the next video.